My name is Dana, and I had spent 12 years as a geriatric nurse, a career that began not in a classroom, but in my grandmother Edith's garden outside Kearney, Nebraska, where she taught me to weed lavender rose before I could read chapter books. She hummed old hymns over the sink and let me stay up late shelling peas by lamplight. When people told me I had a natural gift for caring for the elderly, I never corrected them. I simply had Edith. By the time the events I'm about to describe unfolded, Grandma had been living with my parents in Lincoln for a year. My father, Raymond, sold insurance. My mother, Carol, ran the house like a display model. They had framed it as devotion we can help her. My mother said, but the quotation marks were always there. Hovering just outside the sentence, the warning signs came before the airport. My mother, who had always kept her nails clean and her distance from anything agricultural, suddenly wanted to discuss land values and acreage. My father asked, in the casual tone of a man inquiring about a spare set of keys, whether I happened to know where the deed to the farm was stored. Then came the glossy memory care brochure slid across the kitchen counter, the mention of a facility I was never shown, and finally the plan for what they called a family reconciliation trip, the four of us, plus Grandma, flying to Arizona to view a retirement condo. I had a low, persistent feeling under my ribs, but I had no evidence and no good reason to refuse a trip dressed up as healing, so I said yes. At Eapepli Airfield in Omaha on a Tuesday morning, Grandma held my hand the entire drive, her fingers carrying the faint scent of lavender cream. At the terminal, my father settled her into a lounge chair by the window, crouched in front of her, took both her hands in his, and spoke in the warm tone he reserved for closing sales. "Just sit here," he told her. "We'll check in and come right back." Something in me stood up at that moment, quiet but insistent. I stepped 20 feet away to call the memory care facility on the brochure. The one in Arizona they had never let me tour or review. A woman came back on the line after a brief hold and told me they had no record of any Granger, no admission, no reservation. I turned around. My parents were gone. Their bags were gone. Grandma sat alone by the window exactly as she had been placed, purse in her lap, a folded boarding pass in her hands, waiting for two people who had already cleared security and moved on with their afternoon. I did not fall apart. There was no room for it. I crossed the lounge, found her near the window showing a photograph to a young gate agent. "This is my Walter," she was saying, pointing at a man 6 years dead, and I knelt in front of her. For a single clear moment, the fog in her eyes lifted the way it sometimes did, sudden and brief, and achingly real. She looked straight at me and her whole face softened. "There you are," she said. "I knew you'd come back." I took the boarding pass from her fingers. One way. No return. Purchased 11 days before the smiles. I started writing down the time. A nursing shift teaches you to work in a crisis rather than feel it. So I worked. I noted the exact hour we had arrived, the moment my father gave his promise, the time the facility confirmed no admission existed, and the time I found her sitting alone. I photographed the empty chairs. I photographed both sides of the boarding pass before it went into my wallet. When I called my father, he let it ring twice and sent me to voicemail, which meant he saw my name and pressed the button. My mother texted within the minute. "Don't make this dramatic," she wrote. "We've earned a rest. She's in good hands with you." Earned a rest. I drove Grandma back down to Lincoln, got her settled on my couch with a blanket, and the TV turned low. She slept 12 hours. I did not sleep at all. By morning, I understood that my small rental, all stares and strangeness, was the wrong place for her. For a person living with dementia, unfamiliar spaces are not neutral. They are frightening. There was only one address on Earth her brain still recognized as safe. The farm. I called an elder law attorney in Kearney named Gene Howerin, a man in his late 60s who had practiced in Buffalo County since before I was born and who answered his own phone. I gave him the account in the order a nurse gives a shift report the trip. The lounge, the phone call to the non-existent facility, the boarding pass, and one more item I had found when I arrived at the farmhouse, a draft listing agreement from a local realty office, dated 3 weeks before the airport, with my father's name typed in the seller's line. Prairie Line Realty had walked a stranger across my grandmother's 160 acres, photographed her home, and priced it for sale without asking the woman who owned it. They had not asked her, I realized, because they had already concluded she was incapable of understanding the question. Howard listened without interrupting. Then he said the thing that told me I had called the right person. You did 3 things right in the first hour that most families never think to do. You wrote down the times, you took photographs, and you kept her with you instead of returning her to the people who abandoned her. He paused, and no, taking her somewhere safe was not kidnapping, whatever your father says. My parents got home from Arizona within 3 days. The calls started immediately, each one playing a different instrument in the same orchestra. My mother went first with warmth and reason. My father took a harder line. Then my Uncle Wes, who runs an auto shop in Grand Island and has never successfully kept a thought from spilling out of his mouth, called and skipped the pleasantries entirely. The farm has to sell this quarter, he said. It just does. There it was. Not her welfare, the quarter. They wanted her declared legally incompetent, not to protect her, but to take control of her estate and drive it directly to a closing table. I stopped arguing with them after that call. An argument is noise, and noise goes nowhere. Instead, I called Marion Doyle at Adult Protective Services, filed the abandonment report, and added every document my family had unknowingly handed me to a folder that was growing thicker by the day. Then Marion called about the airport footage. The camera showed my father crouching, holding her hands, standing, walking away, and halfway across that lounge, with his mother sitting behind him in an empty chair. He lifted his wrist and checked his watch. He was not overwhelmed. He was not fleeing in grief. He was on schedule. Marion froze the image on the empty chair. That's not a family that fell apart, she said quietly. That's a plan. They filed first, the way people do when they believe speed signals confidence. My father and my uncle petitioned the court for guardianship and conservatorship of Edith Granger. According to their paperwork, I was the problem, a resentful woman who had removed a vulnerable elder from her established home, isolated her from her devoted family, and positioned herself to benefit from an estate. I had to read the petition twice, because the audacity of it took a moment to fully land. The 2 people who had purchased a one-way ticket and left her in an airport were now asking a judge to protect her from me. Howard, when I called him close to panic, sounded almost pleased. Good, he said. Let them file. Now there's a hearing. Now a judge has to see all of it in one room, on the record. And everything they did to her gets entered as evidence whether they like it or not. We built our case not as an attack, but as a credential. We gathered the physician's capacity evaluation, my dated care log with every medication and difficult night recorded in plain handwriting, the airline purchase records confirming the ticket had been bought 11 days before the trip, the listing agreement, my mother's voicemail in which her own voice said the words she won't even know were gone, and the airport footage. Their lawyer hinted that I was unstable, that night shift workers were unreliable, that a solitary woman with no children who had inserted herself into a family matter had obvious motives. Howard talked me out of responding in kind with a single sentence. You don't win this by proving they're bad people, he said. You win it by proving you're the safe one. 2 witnesses came forward, whom I had not expected. Teresa, the gate agent who had listened to my grandmother describe Walter, testified that the well-dressed man had told her on his way past, almost as an aside, that someone would be along for the older lady. Someone? Not her granddaughter is right here. Just someone, eventually. And old Mr. Vogel, the Granger's neighbor for 60 years, testified that Edith had asked about me by name all year long, even in the Lincoln house, where my parents had apparently told her I was too busy to visit. The hearing itself lasted 1 morning. Their lawyer was polished, and my father took the stand with genuine skill, letting his voice crack at the right moment, never once mentioning an airport. For a time, the room tilted in their direction. Then I stood, opened the binder, and let the documents speak in the order they had been created. License, care log, listing agreement, ticket records, voicemail, footage. When the clip ended and the lights came back up, someone in the gallery gasped, My grandmother, seated beside me throughout, kept humming softly into her hands. My father broke before the session was over. He came out of his chair and told the courtroom this was exactly what he was talking about, that I was manipulating everyone, that the farm was rightfully his. My uncle, panicking, said the rest of it aloud. We needed that sale. Ray. We're out of time. The bank's not going to wait. In their own voices in front of the judge, Judge Peterson ruled from the bench. She found that the petitioners had not acted in Edith's interest, but in their own financial one. That abandoning a vulnerable adult in an airport was, in her words, as clear a disqualification as this court has seen, and that a man who would do that to his mother could not be trusted with her person or her property. She appointed me as both guardian and conservator, and she directed that the abandonment findings and footage be referred to the county attorney's office for review of potential criminal charges. I drove back to Kearney that evening with the guardianship papers on the passenger seat and the window cracked to the flat Nebraska air. Spring came not long after. I cut the lavender roses back hard the way Grandma had always taught me. Right down to almost nothing terrified I was killing them. Within a few weeks there was green where the gray had been, and the bees found us, and the whole back lot began to smell like my entire childhood. One morning I came out with 2 cups of coffee and found her already there, face turned to the sun. When she heard me, she opened her eyes, and for a moment the clarity that the disease occasionally returned, like a small gift, passed over her face. There you are, she said. I knew you'd come back. I sat in the grass beside her chair and let myself believe her completely. I had come back. I wasn't going anywhere.